introduce ourselves a little bit and just tell you, even though we have done a quick intro, like a little bit about ourselves, the education route that we've taken, where we are now, and then we'll explain, if you haven't heard of GitHub or used it much, what that's about briefly. Sophia's going to go into detail about OSINT, which stands for Open Source Intelligence, and that is really her bag at the moment. She's doing really well in that. And we'll go through the case studies of how hackers have used their open source intelligence knowledge to target GitHub and the different attacks that have happened recently. And we'll just say how we can protect ourselves against them, basically. So, and then any questions, I think that we're more than happy to answer them. And this can be about the talk or about anything, really. Just be a nice little chit chat. So if I start talking about myself, I'm a security consultant at NCC Group. I've been there for 2 years now. I started in September 2020 or 2021, I want to say. I'm a security queen alongside Sophia. She'll tell us more about how we actually founded the Security Queens, but we write blog posts and do talks like this, which is great, and a Ladies of Cheltenham Hacking Society admin with Sophia again and some other fab ladies from Cheltenham. We recently attended a Women in Tech Cheltenham meet yesterday for the Women's International Day, which was brilliant. So we just kind of get involved with the community and host our own events. But originally I started out as a forensic computing and security student in Bournemouth University. So I started without knowing really anything about computers. Maybe I'd messed around when my brother had locked me out and made himself an admin once upon a time, and I found a way around it. But that was the most techie I'd ever gotten before. I used to study fashion as well, so I was very much torn between fashion, and then ended up going down the forensics route, thinking that I wanted to be like Garcia off of Criminal Minds, if you've ever heard of her before, and then meeting Sophia and going down the more hackery and pen testing route. But after that, since meeting Sophia and going to the different conferences, I actually did my first talk at B-Sides London, and surprisingly, I actually won that track in 2019, which doesn't even feel like almost 4 or 5 years ago now, which was a great experience. And the project that I had presented on, I actually found that I failed in a lot of areas of what I set out to do. So I just talked about all of my failings and the learning points. I didn't even have to have it all figured out back then. And then from there, it was kind of like a snowball of doing things. So I went on to host a workshop at G3C, which was Glasgow Caledonian's university's first conference. So I basically had a room of students without laptops trying to program these little DigiSparks, but it's a really fun like activity to do, and you can buy one for like a couple of pounds off of AliExpress. But not IT related. I am a lover of foreign places. When COVID hit, it was more my back garden and going on walks and sitting on my sofa. But this year is definitely a year for traveling, and I'm going to get back on that plane as soon as possible and start seeing other countries again. I just like being outside when I'm not at my computer doing the hacks. I like to be out and about. But I'll hand you over to Sophia.
Cool. So my name's Sophia, also known as Spookvia on Twitter. So I also went to Bournemouth University. That's how myself and Sarah met. But instead of doing the forensic and computing course, I actually did the cybersecurity management course. So this is very much strategic cybersecurity, so focusing on policies, processes, business continuity, that kind of thing. So the reason I ended up in technical cybersecurity is I actually did my placement year in pen testing, and I absolutely fell in love with it, and I kind of followed my heart and followed that path in the end. So I too, oh, I'm pressing the wrong buttons. I too am a security consultant, and I'm currently working for NCC Group. But as Andy mentioned, I am also on TV as well. So I am a cyber hunter on Channel 4's Hunted. It's quite a long-winded sort of show to explain, but basically we hunt fugitives on the show, and a part of my skill set on that show is breaking into social media accounts, doing forensic images of PCs, mobiles, that kind of thing, covering data, tapping into metadata, those kind of things. So since starting security things, I've won a bunch of stuff. So I kind of broke into the cyberspace in 2017, but most recently won Most Inspiring Women in Cyber in 2021. And outside of hacks, I am a lover of horses. They've been my childhood love for forever, but also horsepower as well. So I did used to have a drift car, but unfortunately I crashed it too many times and I had to send it to the scrapyard. But we move and we will get there and bigger and better eventually. And most importantly as well as Sarah and some lovely ladies in Cheltenham, we run the Ladies of Cheltenham Hacking Society, which is a technical meetup for women wishing to break into the cyberspace or wanting to learn more technical skills within cybersecurity. So a little bit about Security Queens. So in true cybersecurity fashion, Security Queens was actually formed a few drinks in post-conference, but both myself and Sarah have known each other for years. So we created Security Queens after a few drinks at B-Sides London 2019, I believe it was. Yep, that was it. But actually it was during COVID where the brand really blossomed and we created a platform for ourselves. So we found ourselves a little worse where we were very bored, sort of locked in our dingy student flats, trying to keep the will to live whilst trying to finish dissertations. And therefore our blog was born. So since 2019, we've written over 50 blog posts in different areas of cybersecurity, anything from technical fundamentals to specialty areas like mobile or transport. And most recently, last year, we actually won Most Educational Blog for User Awareness at the European Cybersecurity Blog Awards, which is absolutely amazing. We beat both Troy Hunt, who's an amazing person, and also the NCSC, so we're very, very proud of that one. But we've also been interviewed by the likes of Info Security magazine, and we spoke at various events such as SINAM, DEF CON chapters, loads of LHS meetups. But most importantly, we've also been dubbed cybersecurity influencers by Reddit. And because it's on the internet, it must be real. So we'll go with that one.
Let's get stuck into the more technical side of things then. I say technical, this is an overview of GitHub. So I know we can't see everyone here, but I'm going to ask you all to virtually raise your hand if you have experienced, used, heard of GitHub before. I'll just put my hand up there. Yeah. Hey, look. Oh, brilliant. Okay, so we're not all starting out, but for those who are new to GitHub, GitHub is a code repository source. So let's say you're a student. I'm sure you've had projects where you've got to store your code for whatever you're working on, whatever course you're doing. I'm going to say, let's say you're building a deauthenticator, because that's something that I've done and have enjoyed doing. But a lot of the time, when you start out using GitHub, everything just gets chucked into the main. And when I say main, I mean like your main repository. So you can check out files, make changes, push your files back to your main repository. But actually there is a little layer of version control in there. So you have things like branches as well. So let's say you wanted to collaborate with one of your fellow students on this building a deauthenticator workshop. You might have a developer branch, which you make your changes to, and then you will then push your changes once they're approved, if there's an approval system, to your main branch. So it's kind of like an incremental thing, and you can see all of that history there in GitHub. I wish I had an image now there of the history so you could see what I mean, but it's a collaborative environment that you can work with other students about, which is great. And there's like a lot going on. A load of different types of people can use it. Like we'll talk about later, big corporations use GitHub to build their main products, and that's their main source of money. Sometimes it's their software and their intellectual property, so it's always a massive target for hackers. And when I think back to my repository, it's not that my projects are really important and that private. All of them are pretty much available to you if you ever found my GitHub. I thought, do I really ever delete my code? And in the working world, do I ever really delete my code? And that's a no from me. And it's interesting to sort of think all that information is out there. And if I'm doing that, who else is doing that? And it's not just GitHub as a technology. There's also GitLab, Bitbucket, loads of other different repositories that can be affected by these sorts of attacks. I had a quick look at how many people use GitHub earlier today and the number of repositories that are actually on there. And it's about 100 million developers apparently use it. This is Wikipedia, so don't say everything. Take everything with a pinch of salt. And there are about 372 million repositories. So quite the target for attackers. You can understand why these breaches happen, and it's certain simple things that lead to them, but it's still present in this day and age. So it's quite interesting.
So before we talk about all the fables and fumbles of GitHub, and before we go into case studies, I just want to quickly go through something called open source intelligence. So as Sarah's kindly explained, GitHub is a really attractive target for hackers and attackers. It's usually available out on the interwebs. It's usually externally facing, so people can collaborate, contractors can access it, that kind of thing. So I just would love to talk about a bit of open source intelligence and how this may be used in the sense of a GitHub hack or breach. So open source intelligence, if we've got a nice little one-liner there, is basically the collection and analysis of data gathered from open sources to produce actionable intelligence. So this is basically using information that's publicly available that anyone can get. So if we think of things like social media, using search engines, news articles, public forums, that kind of thing, and it's creating that and using that to create actionable intelligence that they can use in their attack. So loads of threat actors use this on their targets as part of their recon phase. So if we think about the methodology of an attacker or a hacker, before they just go straight in, all guns blazing, through all the payloads, all the exploits, they do a little bit of recon to find a bit more about their target, to make it a little bit more quieter or maybe more targeted for that particular victim. So types of intelligence that an actor might gather is things like identifying potential vulnerabilities. So maybe they found an externally facing Windows box, and that Windows box might be extremely out of date. They then know that's a little bit of information that they could use that as an attack. Finding sensitive company information. So there's been a few instances in some of my work that people have accidentally uploaded confidential documents onto their company website. You can see the watermark in the background, like private, confidential, do not share. And someone's just accidentally mistakenly uploaded that and not realized it. So it's obviously really important to be wary of what you put out on the internet for people to find. And most importantly, I think most threat actors also use OSINT or open source intelligence to find contextual information that can be used in a social engineering attack. So for example, let's say company A is their target. Company A has recently acquired company B, they've just bought them out. They might use this narrative to create a phishing email for their customers going, oh, have you heard, we've just acquired company B, please click here to find out more information. So it just makes that phishing attack a little bit more believable, a little bit more legitimate, and not so out of the blue. So the victims, unfortunately, more likely to fall for that. So open source intelligence, it's a really valuable tactic and technique that attackers use. And reeling back to GitHub, because GitHub's such a well-known public platform used for coding and development, it's definitely used hand in hand with, if they do want to attack a GitHub repo, or perhaps they're trying to grab some source code, they will use open source intelligence as part of that methodology. And sometimes it does feel like you're hiding in a bush trying to find that little golden nugget to get you into that. So a technique used in open source intelligence, and I thought it'd be really interesting just to give you an example of a type of OSINT tactic that people might use or attacker might use. And it's got a bit of a weird name, it's called Google dorking. So Google dorking is a passive technique used by attackers. They basically use Google, the search engine, but they craft custom search queries to find very, very specific information. So attackers may use these dorks to retrieve information such as credentials, or as I mentioned, sensitive documents, personally identifiable information. So anything like an address list or a customer list, to credit card numbers or even passwords, and website vulnerabilities as well. So if you're looking for a particular version of system, you can use Google to try craft a query to find that out, to see if your target has that externally facing on the internet. But there's loads of ways you can use Google dorking as open source intelligence. So I've just sort of borrowed this cheat sheet from Sans. So if you did want to see the full cheat sheet, I have put the URL in the bottom right corner there. But these are the kind of operators that I use in Google Docking. So if you look at the top left-hand corner, you can see cite colon. So that particular doc will basically allow Google to only search that one website. I'm only interested in the information from this one website. I don't care about any other website. You can also look for things like, I'm trying to see what else there is, date. So if you're looking for something that happened last September, you're really interested in that piece of area, you can also put a date. You can specify specific strings. I'm only looking for this one piece of text. You can even specify looking for documents as well. So there's an identifier called file type, which is about halfway down that cheat sheet if you can find it. And this searches for files of a particular extension. So you can put like, I just want PDF files. I just want Word documents. I just want PHP files. Not sure if there would be PHP files just hanging out there, but you never know. So this is a really great way to kind of stack those queries to be really, really specific in what you're looking for. So if you've got a clear like image in your head and you know, I really want this one thing from this one website because I know my target has this website, then you can use Google Docking to aid that process and to make it a little bit more quick for you rather than trying to do it manually. So I've got a few examples here of Google Docking and it all does make sense. It all does come back to GitHub, so please bear with me. So we can see here we've used the operator cite. So what we're doing here is we're looking for on the github.com website for the term NCSC, and you can see that the little NCSC bit has come up back in bold when Google has come back with the search results. A very, very simple example of how that works. You probably could just put NCSC GitHub and get the exact same results. But this is a very entry-level kind of query that one might use. So getting a little bit more spicy. So Pastebin is a website where hackers and attackers usually publish stolen information. It's very well known for that. So now we're having a look through Pastebin to see if we can find any sort of particular information that an attacker might use. Obviously, I have redacted all of this, and this is kind of very sort of, you've got to be careful what you do with this information. So obviously do bear in mind the legalities as well, but this is kind of a nice example of a real life example of how Google Docking is used for bad. So you can see that we've used the site Pastebin. We're looking at Pastebin and we want to just use Pastebin. And we've also looking for the two strings, PayPal and password. So you can see that some people have breached PayPal accounts and they've actually posted the password and credential pairing onto Pastebin. And that's just one sort of way that unfortunately people might not know their information's out there on the internet. And it's one way that attackers and hackers may use open source intelligence to grab that information to get into those accounts. So this is another Pastebin example. This time we're looking for AWS key. So AWS key is a particular string used to access an AWS server, and it's unique to that particular server. So if you grab that, that's basically your key into the server. It's your way into that server. So again, people might not know that this information is out there. It might have been stolen. It might have been mistakenly published somewhere. But it's just another sort of quick way that unfortunately attackers and hackers can grab information and use them for malicious purposes. So now that I've talked through a little bit of Google Docking, a little bit of open source intelligence, we're going to go back to GitHub and talk a little bit about how people haven't really secured their GitHub repositories and how that's unfortunately been the downfall for a lot of companies in recent months. I think sort of in the past 12 months, I've seen it sort of pop up again and again, unfortunately, and we'll talk about a few different scenarios here. So hopefully it gives you a nice big picture of what can unfortunately go wrong. So the first case study we'll be talking about is the Toyota Motor Corporation. This was quite a recent one. So what happened here was a subcontractor accidentally published a portion of their T-Connect site source code. So T-Connect is basically Toyota's connectivity application that allows owners to link their cars with their infotainment systems. So most owners that have that functionality with their car may have that installed. And obviously there's a lot of information floating between that too. So unfortunately, when this piece of source code was accidentally published. It contained an access key to the server containing both customer and management information. So if we think back about open source intelligence and Google Dorking and how people might try to find interesting information, obviously if you publish something like that onto the internet, people can very easily find those little nuggets of information to try attempt to hack or breach a repository or a server. So the impact of this, this led to unauthorized third-party access to a GitHub repository for 5 years, which is it's quite something that it went on for that long. And unfortunately, included in that GitHub repository were the email addresses of over 296,000 customers that had signed up and are using that T-Connect application. So the actions of that, so upon the discovery of the source code online, the database keys were immediately changed to prevent any further unauthorized access from third parties. So there was an apology. So we're very kind of open about this and the fact that it happened. But they also issued a warning to customers that did register in that time frame to be extra vigilant against any phishing scams or any senders claiming to be from Toyota.
Toyota are not the only company that have been privy to these kind of attacks. Okta, a little bit about the company, is a leading provider of authentication services and identity access management solutions. And their private GitHub repositories were also targeted and accessed by an unauthorized third party. The actual details on how they accessed the repo weren't disclosed, unfortunately, so we can't go into too much information about that. But they had also previously been targeted through another breach via a remote access engineer. So if you have a think about a support engineer, they could be helping people within the business, and they probably have access to a lot of different technologies within the company, information within the company. That's quite a good person to target in previous attacks, and it could have led to quite a big compromise in terms of like client data being stolen or anything like that. So in this hack, their workforce identity repo was targeted here, and the impact on this was that client information could well have been gathered. Luckily, it was not the case, but because they're an authentication-based platform or service, this could have had a really big knock-on effect, especially for the types of data they have. They did say that the sensitive information in their repositories wasn't accessed, so it luckily didn't affect them. But like I said, the previous attack had tried to steal client data through that support engineers, through access via the support engineer, and they focused on credentials and 2FA codes. So that then could have had a massive impact on people like you and I, rather than the company themselves, and the reputational damage to them as well would have been huge if that was the case. Luckily, they did have actions, they put actions in place to deal with this. So as soon as they realized that there was suspicious activity on their repositories, they enforced restrictions across the board. They decided to stop third-party software interacting with their repositories, so that was suspended. The commits were reviewed, so going back to that whole history, seeing what people have done before, they reviewed the activity that had actually happened, so they could realize the extent of the information that was accessed and the damage that was done, and then they changed their creds like any good security practice, best practice would do, basically. They did release a statement. I think it's a legality that they do have to disclose any breach. Any big company does that. Just to summarize the breach as well, and they just reinforced that client data was not stolen. They told us when the event happened, so this was actually in December 2022, and they told us how they dealt with it. So a nice little write up there on their website if you were ever interested. But yeah, oh my god, they're safe and sound for now. They have been targeted a lot, but they are now currently safe and sound until the next one.
I'm talking about the next one. So unfortunately, as well as Okta and as well as Toyota and as well as many other companies, Nissan also had a breach with their GitHub. So they actually misconfigured their Git server, and they left that server exposed on the internet with the default credentials admin. So that leaked a huge amount of source code for several mobile apps and internal tools developed specifically for Nissan North America. So the impact of this was there was so much data in this repository that was just out there for anyone to access using admin. And the Git repository contained the source code of things like mobile applications, diagnostic tools, their internal core mobile library, client acquisition and retention tools, marketing research tools, their logistics portal, their connected services, and other backend and internal tools as well. So that print screen on the right is from the ZDNet, and that was just a quick sort of screen grab of the amount of folders and data that was actually in this repository. So obviously this data did end up out there. The leaked data from that Bitbucket instance actually started circulating online in the form of torrent links. So these links were being shared between loads of users on various Telegram channels and hacking forums, probably somewhere like Pastebin or somewhere like that, allowing anyone to access the leaked data. So everyone was getting the source code. So as soon as Nissan realized this was the case, they took that server immediately offline. After they realized the data was being circulated to this extent, they conducted an immediate investigation and secured the affected system, as so they said in a personal statement. They did confirm, luckily, that no personal data was exposed. So the consumers, dealers, employers were all safe, and the source code access for those tools and different sort of applications would not put consumers or their vehicles at risk. So luckily that there was that, but obviously it's not the best situation to end up in the first place.
Final company of note tonight is Slack. I'm sure we've all heard of and used Slack at some point. I know the LCHS have done as well, or are still doing. But as they are seeing in the new year, the hackers were also doing the same, not quite in the same way I can imagine. So in the new year, suspicious activity was detected on GitHub. It turns out that the Slack employee tokens had been stolen and used to gain the unauthorized access to an external repository, and their private code was downloaded. But luckily, customer data was not stolen. It's quite interesting. Again, they didn't explain how the tokens were stolen in their statement, but we can sort of speculate. So whenever you actually have a token that's saved on your host as a .git credentials file, so there could have been potential for an unauthorized access to the system, and they'd be able to gain that access, or there could be pivoting going on within that network, but we don't know for sure. They didn't actually say at the time. So this could, again, have had a massive impact, especially with the user base that Slack has. I mean, the LCHS have used it. So it's quite interesting when you have a look at it. But to talk a bit more about the actual tokens themselves, they're basically like an alternative to passwords. There are a number of different ways that you can authenticate to GitHub. You can use SSH, download repositories, or to gain access and make it easier. There are actually two different types of tokens that they could have used here. So there's classic and there's fine-grained. Classic means that once you've granted the person or that user that token, then they have access to all the repositories that you also have access to. So it's a bit clunkier. Whereas fine-grained is more of a beta tested token at the moment. I actually went onto my own GitHub repository to just try and understand a little bit more about how they were accessing the tokens, generating the tokens, and this is more fine-grained, as it says in the name, because you can actually select the repositories that you want that person to have access to. So for larger companies, that's probably better to give people less access, or just the access they need, because if their tokens are ever stolen, then they won't have access to all the source code, all the things, or potential client data, which is what we're trying to avoid here. So the main thing to keep out, what sort of access controls have you got in place? It's interesting. It made me think of LastPass when I thought about this hack, and even though LastPass wasn't nothing to do with Git and this talk at all, it was a case where source code was stolen in their first instance summary. I'm not sure if you heard of it earlier last year. In their words, as they describe it, a software engineer's corporate laptop was compromised, allowing the unauthorized to gain access to a cloud-based development environment and steal source code, technical information, and certain LastPass internal system secrets. So that data was then used in a second attack, basically, which meant that an attacker gained access to a senior DevOps engineer, and by exploiting a vulnerable system on their network, they were able to bypass controls and gain access to cloud backups, which contained encrypted customer data. So even though in Slack's case, they had source code stolen and no client data was taken, if we think about it, how is that source code then going to be used? So it's still not great in that case. But they did take swift action, which is great to hear. With this company, they realized that suspicious activity was happening once again, and immediately they invalidated the stolen tokens, which means just revoking that access that the users had. There was no actual impact in the customer data. It's just worth thinking about how it would be used in the future. And the code that was stolen apparently didn't give too much away, basically, and they also released their own statement that you can see on the website about the breach and more information there. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. And to talk about the protective measures that actually we can be putting in place or thinking about in our day-to-day life or in our future careers, and how we can think about implementing security measures in a company sense. Let's have a think about, do we really need that code online or accessible to everyone? Do we still use it, or can we just store it in an offline backup? Is the code that we're actually developing and working on private? Have we thought about the status of our repository? I mean, all of mine are pretty much public, but that is on purpose, and any private ones that are embarrassing little projects probably are private, we would hope. But we just need to make sure that we're reviewing that information. And talking of review, we want to review the access to our repository. So back in 2016, when you started your university project with that friend back in the day, have they still got access to the repository? It's just something you can be thinking about. It needs to be regularly reviewed. Or did you log into that laptop once and did you decide to set up SSH keys that might still exist on that laptop, and could it be shared? And then that's quite easy. Like once you've finished using that laptop, or if you're reviewing that access, make sure that you're going through what active SSH keys or tokens you have in your repository, and you can do that just by logging onto GitHub and revoking them and invalidating them when you know they're not actually being used. Like, when was the last login? I think that's something you can check in GitHub, so you can tell whether it's actually needed or not. And over to you, Sophia, for the rest of the points.
So I think the next point is more of a general sort of cyber hygiene recommendation. But obviously, if you've got multi-factor authentication, that adds another layer of defense for a hacker and attacker trying to break into your account, or in this case, your Git repository, by using your credentials. So we saw earlier how easy it is to unfortunately get credentials that have been a part of a breach. So by having that extra layer of defense, whether that be a one-time code or an authenticator, you're just making sure that even though they've got your password, you're still kind of pushing them out with that extra layer. So another option there is if it's in a work environment, using single sign-on. So you've obviously got your corporate email, your corporate credentials, using single sign-on to access apps. So again, another layer of defense. Avoid using personal accounts for work repositories. Obviously, with your personal accounts, there may not be as many controls as there are on your work account. So it's quite important to draw a line between the two, and this kind of is a general for all. So if you've got a work laptop or a work phone, trying to limit the amount of information you share and hold on those devices. So Sarah's very briefly touched on this already, but limiting the amount of collaborators you allow onto your repository. So the likelihood is you probably don't need those 2 university peers that you met in 2016 with still access to your repository. And once you've finished collaborating, kind of reviewing that access and saying, do I still need this person kind of helping and reviewing and pushing the code, or can we actually, seize that access? And finally, audit. So make sure you're implementing regular processes to identify dormant accounts in your repository, and again, reviewing their access, seeing what privileges they have, giving them just enough privilege to do what they need to do, but not the whole world, that something could go wrong if they were to get breached. So keeping an eye out for policy violations and enforcing multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication, as well as single sign-on where possible. And that is our talk. So that was a very quick whistle-stop tour of a little bit of open source intelligence, which is always really interesting to learn about. A little bit about GitHub, just because it's such a widely used platform. I think 100 million users, Sarah, something like that. And we really hope that you enjoyed our talk. We do appreciate that there are a few technical elements in there that you might not be sure about. If that's the case, please feel free to ask us. I'm sure we have time for a few questions. Feel free to contact us on our socials as well. So our Twitter is security_queens, or I'm Spookvia, Sarah's Ginge98. We also have LinkedIn, Instagram, and we do have a load of free accessible educational content on our blog as well. And I think we're happy to take questions now. I'm not sure where we are with time.
Actually checked the chat thinking about it. I've not explored that.
Yeah, we haven't got many questions yet in the chat. We did have one asking if we're associated with GCHQ, which I gave a joking answer to, but you can answer that if you wish.
I'm certainly not associated with GCHQ. I obviously work in the industry, and being based in Cheltenham, I do support some of their schools programs, but not in a professional sense, no.
I want to say a cooler answer and be like, if I told you I would have to kill you, you know.
That's what I put in the chat.
Yeah, I think that's a much better answer. It makes it sound way cooler, but no, I think Cheltenham is very well known for it.
Yeah, I think Sophia's answer was pretty much what she would have to say if she really was involved in GCHQ anyway. So
yeah.
But there we go.
It's quite a techie, and Cheltenham's a very techie part of the country. I think they're building their Golden Valley, cyber Golden Valley developments underway anyway, so that's going to bring a load more technical people to the area, which is brilliant. But yeah, otherwise, no, there are a lot of schemes and groups and things that aren't a part of them. But
so Andy's got a question in the chat that says, what inspired you both to develop careers in cybersecurity, and how do you see your careers in the next 5 to 10 years?
Gosh. Do you go first, Sarah?
I have a really probably an uninspiring answer to this. For me, it was a case of what would be a good career to get into with prospects of developing in the industry, and just becoming, I guess, successful in a career path. And because I had done fashion and realized how saturated the industry was, I was like, well, IT has a lot of different routes. But the main reason was purely because of watching Criminal Minds and seeing Garcia being a forensic analyst and taking down all these bad guys. I was like, whoa, she's so cool. I want to be like a forensic analyst and be able to capture all these horrible people online, especially because I think, at least from my being a teen, when I first got a Nokia brick with Snake on it, to then playing Sims, full-blown Sims on my laptop, as I developed in those small amount of years, like computers became this weird black box of how do they even work, and they're actually way more interesting. And I think just seeing that and knowing that there was like some threat out there, I wanted to make a bit more of a difference and try and stop these people. Now I know there are a lot of people out there, and we almost are like bad guys when we pretend hackers going in and breaking systems sometimes. But yeah, so it was probably an unconventional way. I didn't even know that hacking really existed till I met Sophia and started my uni course. So yeah, but I'll pass it over to you, Sophia.
No, I was the complete same. I grew up in rural Devon, where everyone just doesn't have technology. So for me, it was very difficult to break into that space. But I didn't know that cybersecurity was a thing. I actually had to travel nearly an hour to a college that offered software development and IT as a course, because my local school had to cut computer science because no one wanted to do it. So I thought I wanted to be a software developer. I was like, oh, that's really cool. I like coding. I did coding for 2 years, then realized I don't like coding. And I was a bit stuck. So it was my lecturers kind of pushed me in the direction of cybersecurity. It was very sort of up and coming in academia when I was applying for university in 2016. So I think there was about maybe 5 or 6 universities that offered it as an undergraduate specifically cybersecurity course. There are way more now. I wish I had the choice. I think I had the choice between like Derby, Plymouth and Bournemouth. So it wasn't spoiled too much for choice, but obviously ended up going to Bournemouth. So for me, I think it was a realization that I didn't want to be a programmer, but I still want to be in tech. And I just took that leap of faith by going to a cybersecurity course, and the rest is history, I guess. As for where I see myself in the next 5 to 10 years, so I really like my cars. If you follow me on Twitter, you probably know that. And it's something that's really interesting to me is I did my undergraduate dissertation in automotive hacking. So as cars kind of get pushed towards the autonomous future of being driverless and all this scary stuff, what kind of risks that brings and how we can protect ourselves from hackers like taking control of cars, which is obviously a very unsafe and scary thing to happen. So for me, I'm really trying to sort of study and learn in that niche, and I hope to become a subject matter expert in that area in a few years, way more years down the line.
Awesome.
Deeply disappointed neither of you are a ballerina, but fashion is possibly close.
Very close.
Which, if nobody else saw the adverts, it was a government campaign that was Fatima's next job could be in cyber, and she was a ballerina. But
yeah, I've seen that one. Yeah, it came out COVID time, didn't it? I believe.
Yeah.
Could I ask a question, please? Right. Okay. Where do you see the trend of cybersecurity is going? Many years ago when I started, it was going towards mobile, and now it's just moving. So I'm thinking from a student perspective, when they want to join cybersecurity, where do you what areas that you think that is going to grow, and then they need to develop their skills there. So to think about their careers, basically.
Well, this is a really interesting one. Can I kick this one off, Sophia? Is that all right?
Yeah, go for it.
Mobile is an area that I've just recently been getting into. Recently, I've been doing like Android app reversing for about a year now, which just feels like the time has gone so quickly. And it's a space that I really want to develop in. I've been focusing on Android because it's all open source. There's not many people who focus on the iOS side, so that's a really good skill to have. And like any of the devices which are closed source would also be, it's just difficult to start, I guess, but it's a good avenue to explore. And actually, there is a platform called 7A Security. This is a shameless plug. This is a guy called Abraham I met at a conference who's absolutely lovely, and you can do courses on iOS hacking. And he sent me a t-shirt, which is great. This was years ago now, but the platform's still about and it has got better. But if you're thinking about mobile, like Sophia said, there or someone said, I think there are so many different areas in cyber, but IoT devices and the Internet of Things, basically connected devices, are where it's at for sure at the moment.
Definitely.
Anything, yeah, exactly. Anything that's connected to the internet is potential, and it's a potential attack vector for someone.
And they're connecting everything to the internet, so we're in this predicament of so for example with cars, they're now connecting those to the internet. That's how they get sort of modern vehicles. They flash their software, so they do something called over-the-air update, and the car talks to the internet, the manufacturer talks to the internet, and obviously if you can breach that connection, things can go very wrong. So I think, just to agree with Sarah, IoT is a huge thing. Mobile continues to be a huge thing because everyone's on their phones all the time. You've got your banking app on your phone, you've got your GP on your phone. I think cloud as well, loads and loads of companies are kind of moving away from the physical server racks, and they're moving everything to cloud. So knowing the security vulnerabilities around there and how things can go wrong, I think that's a huge area as well.
Thank you.
There is, sorry, that's like spurred on another idea now. But I know you're probably all absolutely sick of hearing about ChatGPT, but the most exciting / interesting thing I think I've heard about is malware authors and developers using it to create code. And I don't know if that would be a potential career path. I don't know if anyone actually has a specific niche of looking at how a hacker might use artificial intelligence in the future to develop these attacks and actually make it easier for them to build it. It's just that could be a potential area that I don't think has been really explored yet, and ChatGPT is just sort of like exploded.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because the GitHub Copilot had some challenges with publishing keys as well. So you're mentioning GitHub keys in repositories, and I guess from the same risk, which was having those keys live in a GitHub repository, we've got another problem, which is, I guess, not direct hacking, but if your keys getting shared with millions of people who are using Copilot, that's not ideal.
A few weeks ago, we were in the class, and students were playing with ChatGPT, and they were asking for different codes. And it was interesting to see that you could rephrase your question, and finally you will get the answer you want. That's so scary.
Yeah, sort of. See, I love cars. I can't stop talking about them. But moving back to cars, that's how a lot of driverless cars actually do that driverless aspect. They use artificial intelligence, they use machine learning to make those split-second decisions of, am I going to avoid this roadblock? Am I going to go this way? I'm going to brake. And so if you can start to attack that function controls all the mechanical aspects of the car and all the components that make the car go. So I always find AI really interesting, but it's such a huge area. It's absolutely bonkers. I could never, but it's definitely, I think that's a really good point, Sarah, and the discussion we're having now, AI as well. The whole robots are taking over, but not quite.
All we need is a little glass of water and we'll be okay. Robots,
some scissors
or sledgehammer.
Yeah, exactly, then we'll be fine.
Yeah, I'll get a sledgehammer.
Definitely with you on the car front. I started as a boy racer. We used to modify our cars by bolting stuff on, but already, because of the way cars are made, they're putting all of the electronics on the car to start with, and then only enabling them electronically. So you can modify your car with a laptop instead of with a spanner, because you can the little flashing lights on Audis that do the nice little indicators across is a software feature, not a hardware feature. So you can go in and make your car do that if you hack it. So it's, instead of having people with spanners, you've got hackers then doing that.
Laptops.
Laptops, yeah.
It's quite funny. A lot of supercar companies are now offering subscription performance packs, so you can offer more torque and more horsepower, but only if you pay £90 or whatever. So again, it's an attractive thing for hackers because they can profit from that. They're getting something cool for free. So it's really interesting how not only cars, it's very sort of software based as a lot of things, even fridges and houses, cameras. It's always, there's a software wall or a paywall that people are always trying to bypass as well. So
I like the idea of using the AI. So you've got basically Microsoft Clippy coming up in your car going, I saw you accelerating fast. Would you like the performance pack? It's $9.99 to subscribe.
Didn't Ford recently patent some features to do with cars being able to repossess themselves?
Oh my gosh, that's I didn't know about that.
Yeah, I heard something briefly.
Ooh.
Wow.
I was also actually. I've got another. Oops, sorry. I'll let you. There's a question here from Yusuf. At the moment, it's: do you think our version of the concept of data privacy will be more alien as cybersecurity doctrines and hacking tools advance even further as time goes on? Yes,
100%. I think even our Computer Misuse Act is from 1998 or something. It's absolutely ancient, and it just doesn't take into account all the intricacies and all the advancements that we're going through at the moment. So, for example, using Facebook, they sold. There was I'm not going to make any bold comments, but there was some issues with them selling data to third parties, them using it for marketing material. So with that and the things like the GDPR regulation, our new Data Privacy Act, that kind of thing, it kind of adds a new facet to what is private, what is our rights as data users and data owners. And I think a lot of it's kind of still very textbook and black and white, but actually it's becoming more grey.
It's quite interesting because there was, whilst we were at uni, an act that was passed, which was something, it was almost like a spying act. I don't know if you remember the name of it, Sophia. I can't remember the name of it personally, but it was
Surveillance Act.
Yes, so our government would be able to access the data. But I think with anything, I see a lot, especially with even just reverse engineering apps, I see a lot of just web requests in general. When I'm reversing them, I can see the data it's sending, and a lot of the time you'll see a request that's just sending over your location, or it's just sending your IP, or it's, you know, scanned your Wi-Fi router and it's taken like these addresses and it's sent it over. And I know that there are policies in place to stop that, but this is like more of the nicest side of the attackers and the hacks and things like this. This is like quite common to see. If you download something like that or you visit a website, these background requests that are getting made, your information is just, it's out there. If you're connected to the internet and you've gone and visited a third-party website and you've accepted all these cookies, which also could be doing location tracking, then some sort of information is out there about you and it's stored somewhere, and they've got like 10 years, I think, that they're allowed to store it with, and unless they say otherwise, you know, and sort of that they say, you know, or they don't say, and who really knows how long and what data they've got on you other than GDPR, which is making them track it and things like that. But it is interesting the amount of
I've got two questions to ask. One is, first of all, if somebody wants to go to cybersecurity, what are the personal characteristics? You know, what sort of people you think that if they join cybersecurity sector, they're going to be successful? Secondly, those people who are not from cybersecurity background and they want to, you know, start learning about it, what are the online resources that they could access and start learning about them?
So I think you've definitely got to be curious to be in cybersecurity. You have to think outside the box. You've got to think of, like, in the mind of an attacker, I guess. What if is something I ask myself all the time. What if this happens? What if they do that? What if they add this functionality? So to be very curious and also, I guess, persevere as well. There will be days where you won't find anything, or you think, you know, this is going to be the bane of my life, but just to persevere and be hard willing as well. But I think something I always sort of give advice to students is showing that willingness to learn and adapt. There are so many things constantly changing in cybersecurity. Like, I'm always learning something new. I'm learning a new tool, learning a new tactic. And that's what makes this industry really engaging, because everything's so dynamic, and no 2 days are kind of ever the same in that respect. But I think sort of my big tips for anyone breaking into cyber is go to events like this. This is where it all started for me. This is absolutely where I started making those connections, and you have a conversation with someone, they tell you about this book, you go read that book. Someone tells you about this lab, you go do that lab. So I think this is really key, to start meeting people, start talking to people that are in industry, or maybe just do it as a hobby even. And there are loads of online free and accessible labs and stuff. So it does depend which kind of pathway you want to take into cyber. But the internet's your friend in this case. It can, even though it can be used for bad with like open source intelligence, it's your absolute friend. That there are so many great stuff out there for you to kind of help you make that career switch if you wanted to. I don't know if you have anything to add on top of that, Sarah.
That pretty much nailed it for me. I mean, the internet was created to share knowledge, so it's definitely the best place to go as a student to find out information. And there are like a ton of, I use so, as well as going to the meetups and the conferences and just networking with some amazing people. I think like the resources such as immersive labs, or just going to W3 schools to learn a bit about coding, and just trying to find that little topic that interests you, because there are so many different roles that are out there. But also, like Sophia said, being curious and not being afraid to ask questions. There is always that massive, I'm going to talk about imposter syndrome, because I think every single person feels it at some point or another, but it's not possible for you to know everything about all the things in technology, and it's always changing. So like you say, asking the questions, not being afraid to ask questions to other people. And then once you've built that network, you might know, oh, you know, Sophia knows about car hacking. I'm going to message her on LinkedIn and be like, what is a Kanban bus thing, whatever, I don't know, it's not my thing, but like, yeah, like, you know, it's just not being afraid, but not, you know, trying to let imposter syndrome take over and feel like you're not doing well or whatever, because you know more than maybe the person sitting next to you on the train, for example, about that thing, and you know you'll eventually get there if you keep persevering, like you said. So I think
we're all learning. No one knows everything, basically.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed. You never stop learning.
There's another question in the chat from Sabrina this time. When hearing about OSINT, often the focus is on offensive tactics and how to use OSINT for passive recon. But are there any useful tools or methods to regularly seek out OSINT as a blue teamer?
Yes, there is in the short form. So OSINT's not obviously just weaponized by attackers, it's used for defense as well. So an example of this is one of the bits of work that I've been doing is researching APTs and APTs meaning advanced persistent threats. So these are big government backs, they've got loads of money, they've got loads of support, hacking groups, but they usually do things for bad. So for example, we see some geopolitical tension between Russia and Ukraine, and Russia, I think one Russian group recently hacked Germany because they supplied some tanks. So that's where it can get quite dangerous about how these big groups can be actually quite an issue. So some of these groups will use the same tactics, or they'll use the same tools or the same exploits. So it's quite easy to map an attack to a particular group. So a bit of work that I did was researching into these big hacking groups and the sort of current trends on what's the most popular exploit, what's the most popular tool, what's the most popular vulnerability, and actually feeding this information that I found out back to a SOC or a CERT team, so they can add it to their rulings, they can add it to their bits of software to look out for those particular tactics and those particular indicators of compromise to be more defensive and to be more robust against attackers, particularly if there's a current trend going on.
Another question which is on the board as well is Alicia has asked, any advice that you can give to somebody who wanted to change careers into cyber?
Yep, I'm gonna kick something. We have a friend who actually recently changed. She is now the admin lead for the Ladies of Cheltenham Hacking Society. Her name is Natalie Cole. She's brilliant. But she was a vet who then moved into the cybersecurity industry, and she's actually a senior security consultant at NCC Group now. So she's probably the prime example. And I think from what I gather, because I've always been in cybersecurity in terms of university and coming and joining career, she did a lot of work learning about hacking. She had, like, I think it was a Python for beginners book that was great and illustrated, and I think it was for children, but you know, you've got to start somewhere, and she took the time outside of her career to study and then eventually joined. I mean, Sophia, did you have anything else to add on that? I was just...
No, I think we sort of vaguely covered it with your question, Andy, that I think my key sort of takeaways is like networking. I keep saying this, but it's so important, like networking and finding out those connections, finding out what's in industry, using online resources, using literature as well, and just utilizing your contacts to help bolster you and support you on that journey. I mean, I would definitely not be where I am now without the help of those people I met very, very early on in my career. So I cannot sort of emphasize enough how great and important these types of events are.
I think, I had a thought whilst you were saying that too, but some of the main learning points, I guess, basically since joining NCC, we've done a lot of web apps and inf and hacking in that sense in Android reverse engineering, but I found that my own personal projects, not just, you know, networking side things, but my own personal projects where I've taken the time to try and develop the de-author, like that workshop, and build a presentation to teach others, or writing these blog posts for security queens on something that I don't necessarily know much about, has helped me to learn. So I feel like that didn't make 100% it didn't make sense, but basically you can network, but also to help yourself, you can challenge yourself to be like, I want to learn more about web applications and how this HTTPS protocol works or whatever. And then you can try and write a resource yourself or a presentation on how it works, and that might help you to learn and help you to focus your learning as well, if that makes sense. But yeah, that's like one thing, like say to add is just your own project.
Yeah.
So some comments in chat about learning to hack by hacking people, and we've had some suggestions of tools. I think you mentioned immersive labs in your talk. There's also Hack the Box, which you have to hack to actually get into, interestingly. And someone else has said try hackme.com. Do you have any other suggestions of ways of hacking other people without it being, or hacking assimilated other people without it being an ethical challenge?
I think try hackme is a really good one. So again, agree with that. They do provide your own sort of virtualized labs, so you can safely try attack a website or whatever, and stay on the right side of the law. If you are starting out, there is something called over the wire labs. So they offer loads of different labs in different areas. So there's one in reverse engineering, there's one in web hacking. There's also DVWA if you want to get into web app hacking. And that is a virtual machine that you download and you set up. And it's really, really vulnerable in a million ways. So it's a nice kind of easy introduction to how to attack a website. What else? Metasploitable is quite a good one, Sarah, I think.
Metasploitable. OWASP.
Yeah, OWASP is quite good. Portswigger Labs by Burp Suite, again, really great for web app hacking. Just trying to think.
I think as well, like learning how to hack is great, but understanding the thing you're trying to hack is also really important. So one thing I found with my course was the ethical hacking side of things was very high level. You were doing port scans and things like that to find services on a box, just like you would with try hack me, or like you'd be trying to scan a web app, for example. But understanding like what are ports, what is that service, how does it communicate, looking at things like the OSI 7-layer model to try and understand like the different ways that a computer communicates. It's just, I think, learning the lower level side of things and how computers are working are just important as learning how to hack them as well. And I think that's one thing I wish I knew before I started my university course, was just more the science behind a computer as well as the fun software side, using this tool to hack this thing. Like, what is the tool doing? That's like quite a good question to ask yourself when you're learning.
Another question just come in. Oh, sorry. Are you worried about cyber warfare being a new front for warfare when it comes to conflicts between countries?
Yes, definitely. It's very scary because, like I sort of said, that obviously Russia, Ukraine is its own sort of scenario, but we've seen in the kind of past few years, there's been more attacks on critical national infrastructure. So when we talk about critical national infrastructure, these are things that a country needs to survive. So things like food, water, transport, healthcare. So if an attacker tries to target one of those sectors and brings that down, that's going to end up either sort of harming or costing the lives of people. So if people can't get clean water, that's going to be a huge issue. If they can't get healthcare, that's going to be a huge issue. So there's been kind of a spike of attacks in these areas. And we've seen it kind of reflected in what's happening with Russia and Ukraine as well. So it is very concerning. And a lot of these sort of hostile nations, they're pumping so much money into these APT groups. It's absolutely insane. They're giving them so much money and support and so many things to do what they've got to do. And I don't know if any of you saw the Undeclared War. Was it Channel 4? I think it was.
Yeah,
but
I think it was. Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah, it was that's kind of my ultimate fear, I think, if you've ever seen that TV show, that people do realize that cybers actually can be weaponized in that kind of way. And the capability is there, unfortunately. So I think it's a very kind of scary area. Yeah.
When we were in, I think we were at a conference, someone did a talk about cyber warfare, but it looked at kind of the physical side of things. And especially with Russia and Ukraine, Russia had changed their ISPs to be all Russian owned. And also there were points brought up about, because computers talk over physical wires, like we always forget about this, they're literally running under the sea right now. As you think about it, like attackers, like activity is always being monitored around these sorts of physical aspects of cyber, of IT and our infrastructure as well. And it's quite, I think people are always, from what I've heard and what I've gathered so far, it's a constant battle. It's always going on like this. We're scanning the next country, they're scanning us. We're constantly trying to gather our own intelligence. And I think it's scarier when you think of things like Russia and Ukraine and Russia attacking Germany and things like that, that when it actually happens, how did they get that information, and what do they actually know about us? And but I think everyone's constantly surveilling the other countries as well. It's never not going to be there in this world, I feel like, unless the internet's not there. It's always around.
It's something the MOD take very seriously. They have a whole 77 brigades specialised in cyber warfare, and I was at a talk with given by General Coppinger Symes, and he was at the time head of Defence Digital, and they're now seeing that as another warfare space. So we've got land, sea and air, which is a traditional battlefield, but now there is also cyber and potentially space as well. So they're looking at that as a potential theatre of war, as well as the traditional forces.
Another question is, within industry, have you used Kali Linux and tools such as Hydra?
Yes, definitely. So Kali Linux is really great because it comes preloaded with loads of tools. But the great thing about having sort of Linux is it's quite adaptable. You can download tools from GitHub, you can kind of create your own tools, your own scripts. So I think the majority of pen testers I know use some sort of Linux host to do testing from. I think we all kind of start on Kali Linux, and then as we kind of learn more and we figure out what works for us, we then build our own Linux environment that we're happy to test from.
Open source tools are great as well. It's not something that you should shy away from. When someone's built an awesome tool, and it makes your life easier and you're trying to get something done quickly, like it is always nice to have and to build up your own little repository, ironically, of tools.
Cool. You okay there, Sarah?
Oh, she's frozen.
Oh, yeah.
You're back.
Yeah, you're back. You're back in the room. You're back in the room. Does anybody have any more questions for Sarah and Sophia at all, please? Oh yeah, what's a good start for a network student which could harness all the network knowledge that could be used to contribute to cyber-based attacks and learning? And that's from Ahmad.
Can I start with this one?
Yeah, of course.
I did a networking module in uni in my final year about how mobile networks communicate, and it's helped me no end knowing, and actually not even just mobile networks, but even like Wi-Fi networks and how they communicate. Attacks can stem from these, just knowing how it works, basically. So, for example, Wi-Fi networks, I think it's WPA2, there are different standards of communication on a Wi-Fi network, and people have found vulnerabilities throughout the years on each different type of communication method, and having that base knowledge of networking could help you figure out, or brainstorm with other people how you could actually break them. So, for example, a deauth packet is used in a deauthor attack. So that just means that you could spoof a host that's on a network, and you could send a packet, a deauth packet to the router to be able to deauthenticate all the other devices. So that's an attack, a denial of service attack vector. That something like having networking information of Wi-Fi like how the Wi-Fi network works, that sort of information and knowledge would help you in a cyber career. And it's it's always good to know how things work in order to know how to break them. I hope that kind of answers your question in that sense. But that's why, and that's also why there are different versions of things, because someone might have found a security vulnerability in one version of a protocol, for example. So yeah,
I think it's really important to know networking, because I didn't very well, and then I had to learn it whilst I was learning how to pen test. So to have that foundation of knowledge that you actually know how things talk to each other, and the different ways things talk to each other, is really, really important if you do want to go down that technical career path of either pen testing or security architecture, or even designing a secure network. So I think in sort of practical things moving forward, I said CCNA, I believe, is a Cisco one, which is quite a nice one to have. And also just kind of using your networking knowledge to start looking at inf stuff. So because you've got that foundation knowledge of knowing how computers talk to each other, applying that to a lab where you can actually start breaking into a box and what it's actually doing.
Another question in the chat with, as such a rapidly changing industry, it's easy to feel like you blink and get left behind. Do you ever experience imposter syndrome or burnout? And do you have any advice in that regard? That's Sabrina.
Yeah, I'm always thinking I'm not good enough. No, I think imposter syndrome is huge in this industry. Like, I think everyone I know probably has some form of imposter syndrome, just because it's so fast paced, like you said. But also there's so much new talent coming into the pool as well. I think people kind of feel like, oh my gosh, I need to keep learning, I need to keep doing all these things. I went through a really, really bad phase of burnout about this time last year, where it was like kind of hit rock bottom in that regard, because I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping, and it really affected kind of my work-life balance. So unfortunately, I had to hit rock bottom before I could realize I'm probably not going to do that again. So for me, any advice with burnout is creating very, very strict boundaries. That 9 to 5 is work. Close the laptop. You need to create that boundary for yourself, and also setting some time aside. So for me, at least once a week, I do something I really enjoy. So whether that be horse riding, or I go to fitness classes with my friends, or I get a coffee, I make sure I do that at least once a week, where I'm seeing someone else and doing something I really enjoy. And at least a couple times a week, I have a self-care evening where I just get a nice bottle of wine. Not all at one time. That's probably, don't drink a whole bottle of wine. So I get a nice glass of wine, and I have a good bath, and I really chill out and I disconnect from the world. I think it's just really important to schedule that time into your work week to make sure you're decompressing and you're winding down. And with the imposter syndrome, I still have it myself, but just constantly reminding yourself that no one knows everything. Everyone's still learning. You know, we're all in the same boat, because we're all just kind of, you know, on our merry way, trying to be the best people we can be in industry.
I think it's the same. I've definitely experienced imposter syndrome, especially just even in the office, working with colleagues that are so smart. And I know, for example, all the car hacking that Sophia knows, I wouldn't even start to understand what she knows. And it's just, you know, you've got to remember what your skills are, and that it's your own journey and it's your own time frame, and you shouldn't worry about trying to be here by this date. You know, with the 1,000,001 different things and new technologies that are joining, you can only go as fast as you can go, and take it one step at a time. That's one thing I find helps me no end. If I have 10 different tasks assigned to me, I'm like, right, well, I will focus on one, I will give it my all, I will take a break, I'll have a coffee or a biscuit or whatever, I will come back to my next task, and then I will start, like, so it's just figuring out what works for you, because it doesn't, like, what one thing works for someone might not work for another person. And then, like Sophia said, just the gym for me is my outlet. I'm like a dog. I need to be walked, I need to go outside, and I need to have exercise. So I end up going to the gym. It clears my mind. I see friends. I feel better for it and myself. I go on a walk almost every day, like, just to, even if it's raining, like tonight, I will be going on a walk. It'll be 1 hour. I don't know. It doesn't matter. I'll just go outside and I'll like chat to my granddad on the phone, or like anything like that. So it's just sort of nice to get out from being so sucked into what, like, this industry is all consuming sometimes, especially when you're starting out and you're going to conferences and you're networking and meet people, and then you have Discord installed on your phone and they're talking to you all the time. It's very hard to switch off. So yeah, just get your own routine, find what's fun for you. And
I think switching off being the main one, literally turning
Yeah,
off your phone, take
totally
an
agree.
evening and just disconnect, because it does absolute wonders knowing that no one's badgering you.
Sophia,
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more with you.
Yeah.
Very well
Thanks.
said. Very well said, both of you. And
I was just going to
And,
add as well. Sorry,
okay.
have
After
you
you.
finished?
no, after you.
I was
Seriously,
just
after
gonna-
you.
Just while I remember, just of the points you made, do you think like specialization is important, and how early in your career would you say that should happen?
I actually recently spoke to someone about this, and so they explained it in like a sense of being a T human or a T person. This isn't going to make any sense. I literally only heard about it this week, so please bear with me. But for example, my specialization is mobile. It's something I'm really interested in. You could also specialize or be really good at, this is in a pen tester perspective, web app hacking or imp hacking. You could get really good in one area and that could be really helpful. But if you're a T person, you might be able to slide into another direction and start learning something completely new and have a bit of knowledge in other areas as well. And it makes you really versatile in this industry. So you could specialize for sure, but don't cut yourself short. If there's something else you're interested in, it's never too late to just like whatever part of the industry you might be interested in, trying your hand at it. Sorry, Sophia, I jumped in on that one.
No, I completely agree. I think there's so many different roles you can step into. I think in the past 18 months, I've sat in like 3 different specialty areas. So I've done a bit of automotive, I've done a bit of threat intelligence, I've done like some web app hacking. And I think what's really great about this industry is there's so much lateral movement. So if you specialize in one thing and go, oh, I'm a bit bored of this now, there's nothing stopping you specializing in something else. I'd definitely say don't burn yourself out in the sense of, oh my God, I'm going to specialize in 5 different things at the same time. But just bear in mind that there will be opportunities if you don't have the capacity to do that now. There's no pressure. Like, this is such a great industry for skilled knowledge transfer as well. So yeah.
Another question has come in as well. For a starter to career, what would be a good step to succeed in joining industry? And that's from Ahmad.
So I think joining industry is changing. I think historically people would look for, oh, you must go to uni, you must have studied computer science and all of this. But actually that's not the case anymore. It helps, it gets your foot in the door, but it might get you the interview, but it doesn't get you past that. So I think from my experience in talking to people that perhaps are career changers or don't have that background, a lot of it is just being a nice person and showing your willingness to learn. Technical skills can be taught. Technical skills can be kind of, you can study, you can get your certifications with enough time, that will come. But to actually be the right kind of fit into a team and wanting to learn, wanting to play a part of the team and wanting to kind of be in part of that environment is much more valued to employers than having all the acronyms under the sun showing that you specialize in cybersecurity.
I couldn't agree more with that. And I think
Totally agree.
Yeah, the soft skills like that you touched on there, just knowing how to talk to people, it's so important in this industry, be it talking to clients or your colleagues and making friends with them and being open-minded to making these new connections and learning from these people that you might be in the company for years with. You know, it's a great skill to have. And that's that. If you're welcoming and you're happy and friendly, and other people will want to see you succeed as well. So it's just, that's probably a big step in success.
As an early careers advocate, I believe I'm obliged here to say a great first step would be to join the BCS to access the career tools and help your professional development. But also as a training provider who spends a lot of time talking to employers, it's never about the tech stack. It always takes us a long time because we want them to tell us what tech they use. So we say, what skills do you want from a junior employee? And they always start with talking about the soft skills that Sophia and Sarah were just talking about. It's never, oh yeah, we want them to be able to program in this language. That's not the first thing. Eventually we'll get to that and we'll go, well, what do you use? And they tell us about the technology. But always the first things they're talking about are people who are enthusiastic about the field and interested in the technology and can, you know, talk to people and have all those kind of soft skills, rather than someone who has, you know, the certificates and things. So it's being able to demonstrate some of those other skills. The tech stuff is almost a byproduct. Obviously they need someone that can do the thing, but it's all the other things that make the difference.